Hi, Wayne Doorband here for the biweekly NTP CEED webinar huddle that we hold here at our Northern Colorado headquarters in Loveland, Colorado, both live here at our site and also going out over the web to those of you that are watching. Enjoy what we have for you today. Hi everybody, this is Wayne Doorband from beautiful Loveland, Colorado, and we are here today for our biweekly huddle. And by the way, you probably have already gotten it. It's not the right time. We actually tried to do this last week, which would have put us in the first week of December, and we had some technical difficulties. So we were fortunate enough to be able to get Russ to be willing to come back again this week, and we are doing this a week later. So those of you that are out there live, we're actually a little bit behind, but that's all right. It's the first time we've actually been delayed in the 12 months almost that we've been doing this. It's kind of exciting. The very first one of these that we did was January 29th, I believe, and we've done one every first and third Wednesday since. So to have it one time out of the year when we get delayed, there's nothing wrong with that, right, Russ?
Well, it's my fault. It's not your fault. You're being polite.
Oh, it didn't. Anyway, bottom line is that we're here, and we're excited to have Russ with us, and we're going to have a fun time today. Russ is a longtime friend and business partner, and there's no better fun than you can have than doing things with your friends. It would be better if he and I were sitting in the same room together, because then we were done, we could go out and fish on my ponds or fish on the Boise River or something. But right now we'll take advantage of just the fact that we can sit and look at each other over the computer screen. So, Russ, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. Thanks, Wayne. But make sure your folks out there know that it was my fault that we were running late, not yours. You see, I don't have very many computer skills. This is basically a typewriter for me.
Well, you're getting better, and we're helping you with that. So, yeah. Well, anyway, that's, again, we're here, so it's all going to be cool. Anyway, just a little bit of introduction. I'll talk more about Russ, but again, this is our bi-weekly huddle, and we do this first and third Wednesdays, with this week being an exception. We actually don't have our guests scheduled for next week yet, and you know, it really has to do with it being close to, I think, the holiday season. We've actually got booked out between, I think I've been told by my staff that we're completely booked between the first of the year and the end of March, but we haven't got next week booked. So I'll throw it out to our audience. If you've got a speaker that you'd like us to talk to next week, we're wide open for it. I actually hope to have someone would book by tomorrow, but we'll get that done. And then we'd love to have you come back and listen to that. But also, like I've said many times, if there's any of these webinars that you haven't seen, you can go online and you can see them on a replay basis. You can go to our ecolonomics.org site, or you can go to the Nourish the Planet site, and you'll see the replays that you can get to there, and you can watch any of these that we've done in the past. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I'd love to introduce my friend Russ Biaggne. Well, again, Russ and I have been business partners and friends for, I'm going to make a little guess here, but I believe this might be coming up on our 31st, oh my gosh, I hate to say that, 31st anniversary, Russ. I think we met and we started to do things in 1984. So that was 31 years.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And frankly, I don't feel like it's been 31 years, but I guess that's a good thing that times have moved quickly. Russ is in Boise, Idaho, which is where Deb and I and we had our business back in that 1994 time frame. We had just moved there from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Idaho is basically my second home. I had gone to school in northern Idaho previously, and we moved a business from South Dakota out into Boise. We met Russ as he was getting started with a new business venture that he had that I'm sure he'll talk a little bit about, that was actually in the asbestos abatement area, and we ended up becoming friends, becoming business partners. Eventually, we first provided service, right, Russ? I think I remember pretty clearly at least one of the first projects we worked on, and I even remember a phone call, and then a truck ride. I was riding with you in your truck down near the river, the Boise River, on the west side. I don't remember exactly the location, but going to a commercial place where you did a boiler, removal. Do you remember
That's
that?
exactly right. That's exactly right. Absolutely right. Remember it. And it was amosite brick that was that the boiler was laden with, and it was out in a storage area behind a chain link fence. And we were out there trying to figure out how to take this brick off of this amosite off of this boiler. And I think you probably saved my life that week, because you taught me a few things that I needed to do, some precautions, little things like making an enclosure and having a face mask, and in this case, maybe something other than Levi's. Yeah, if I recall correctly, the only reason I have not died from lung cancer is probably because of you. That's how I remember it.
And even as you described it, I didn't remember the storage area, but as you said it, I do now. And yeah, I would just say it nicely and say maybe you weren't doing everything right prior to that as it relates to
well, that's a given, but it wasn't entirely my fault. You must remember the regs during that period of time. I don't recall the exact percentage of particulate in your breathing area, but it was way, way, way more then than they decided a few months later, when they decided maybe it had to be down to 0.01 microns. I think it was like 3 microns or something like that, which was a veritable dust storm, if I recall.
Right.
Remember the regs changed?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I also remember workers in enclosures having cut holes in their respirators so they could smoke during their breaks.
Yeah, that was always a novel. That was a novel touch, wasn't it? A lot of guys can't do that.
Yeah.
It was shortly after that time I decided to go to an engineering school up in Washington State to learn how to spell asbestos and figure out how to do it correctly. And from that point and from your guidance, we started AAI, which is the acronym or abbreviation for Asbestos Abatement Incorporated. And later we started another company called HasTalks, which was the company that you basically ran for the industrial hygiene section of that work in the laboratory facility. And we ended up with a transmission electron microscope, and we're doing all kinds of things that, oh my gosh, we never dreamed, I don't think, that we would be doing. What was really interesting about that period of time was that we soon evolved into one of the foremost laboratory facilities, evaluation facilities in the whole Northwest. And we bought Bob Woolner from Florida up there to run our lab, and you kind of monitored him and helped train him on the equipment, and here we are in a little suburb of Boise called Meridian, with not one but 2 transmission electron microscopes to do particulate evaluation, hard metal evaluation, and anything else we wanted to look at. And I remember quite distinctly, even though I was one of the owners of the equipment, you wouldn't let me touch any of it. And at some point you're going to have to, apologize for that, because I never even got to run the darn thing, But
let me ask you this.
That's probably good.
I'm going to interrupt though, just because as I think you know, the administrator that's helping us here, and she's sitting right about 10 feet away from me, was one of those electron microscopists. So I do recall that we didn't let you get too heavily involved with that equipment. But let me ask you this. Were you aware that she and Bob Woolner were having ice cream fests that I wasn't invited to? Did you know that was going on? And did you ever get invited?
No. I didn't.
You didn't get invited either?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that it wasn't just me that was excluded. It was a broader exclusion. So
yeah. That's amazing.
And by the way, for others' benefit here, we were the only company, Russ, if you remember, that had 2 top transmission electron microscopes west of the Mississippi River. And we may have been the only company in the United States, but I think we knew we could validly make the claim that we were the only company west of the Mississippi. Now, this was after we had further expanded into Denver area, where we had one of them in Denver and one of them in Boise. And then, if you recall, not long after that, we moved that one from Boise to Denver, and then we had 2 of them in the same building in Denver,
Exactly.
which I think was
unusual. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and so why don't you back up a little bit, Russ, and tell the group about maybe what brought you to that day in the mid '80s, and a little bit about your life that led you to that point. That was your time at home, your growing up time frame, and so on. Just give us a little bit of that history.
Okay. Well, very quickly, I grew up in Boise. I was born and raised there, and I went to. I lived in the north end of Boise, which was at that time a little cow town of about 35,000 people. It was the kind of community that you would, would be hard to imagine anybody would be so blessed to grow up in a community like that. But I did, and went to school there, obviously, and then I ended up going to the military, went to the Naval Academy, and I ended up serving my country for a while during the Vietnam period. And when I came back from the military, I was medically retired in 1973. I was looking for a job, and I ended up in the building maintenance industry. A good friend of mine had talked me into coming in and help him sell accounts and run a company that he had just started in. And I needed a job. I had 3 children, and so I started a company called Western Building Maintenance, and we went into the building maintenance industry. In that industry, we ended up servicing about 150 buildings in Boise, Idaho, which was basically all of them. And one of the buildings, let me step back, my oldest son, at the time he was in high school, he was... each morning he would go downtown Boise before he went to school, and he would go by each one of the buildings, pick up any trash in front of the doors. Some of the buildings he actually had instructions to open them up and go in, start the coffee, and those kinds of things. Well, one of those mornings, it was in January, when he opened the door, the back end of the building blew up. Now this, I know that's hard to imagine, but just blew out the whole back of the building. This building was a stock brokerage firm. It was called Piper Jaffray, and of course I get a telephone call. That was pre-cell days from my son, who was fairly excited, and so I went down there with a couple of fellows, and we were trying to secure the back of the building. The fire department was there. It didn't really start the building on fire; just blew it up. The boiler. The heating unit blew the back of the building up, and so here we are. I'm out there with my team, and I'm loading bricks of amosite into the dumpster. And about that time, the fire chief came up to me and said, "Russ," I knew everybody in town, all the police, all the firemen, and he said, "I think that's asbestos." And I said, "So?" And he said, "Well, there's regulations on that now." And I said, "Well, we don't have time for that right now." So we ended up closing the building off, and then I had another meeting with the fire department to learn a little bit more about this problem that I had created, and discovered that I needed to learn more. And that's about the same time I met you, and decided to go to a school up in Seattle to learn a little bit more about it. And the reason I was interested in it, I had been cleaning things for a long time, and I was getting 25 cents a foot to wash your walls in maybe a building. And here I could clean that same area for about $5 a foot. The math worked for me, and it was a high incentive. And so I learned very quickly how to take care of the asbestos problems in buildings in a timely, efficient, and a safe manner. And we started a company, you and I did, Wayne, called AAI, which later evolved into HasTalks, which was also a consulting company and a laboratory facility. So we expanded our cleaning program rather dramatically, exponentially. And now we had several other operating companies. And gosh, Wayne, it's hard to imagine how many buildings we actually remediated, how many we surveyed, how many we cleaned up. I mean, we did what? 700 churches and schools for the LDS church throughout the entire Northwest and the Midwest. We did most of the schools in Nevada, Arizona, certainly Idaho. We did countless numbers of churches all over the country, and it was a period of time where it seemed like you and I had endless energy and enthusiasm, and there was absolutely nothing that we would not consider to take on if we thought we could solve a problem. And you kind of led the way on the science end of it. I was in charge of the manpower and the teams, getting them all lined out and getting them equipped. And you did your best to keep me within the framework of the law, and I did my best to pay for it. And so that was a real brief overview. Later on, as you know, we along the way on parallel tracks, my other partner and I, Larry Scheider, invented the backpack vacuum, and we started another company called ProTeam. ProTeam ended up being probably the nation's foremost manufacturer of backpack vacuum systems. And we designed highly filtrated systems that did not release any particulate into the cleaning area. We also made vacuums that were HEPA filtrated. That was before HEPA became a marketing word. It actually had meaning. And we also built ULPA filtrated vacuum systems to go into clean rooms for manufacturing companies like Micron, which was starting in Boise at the same time, and they would actually use our vacuums to take care of the clean rooms. So we had that company, and we ended up doing an awful lot of work on and research on particulate control in the cleaning environment. We kind of wrote the book on green cleaning. When the LEED program for the leaders in environmental and engineering for the U.S. government was established, the guidelines, we actually did the first standard operating procedure for a LEED building cleaning program. And the first LEED building in Idaho was built by a guy by the name of Gary Christensen, and it was a platinum LEED building, and for many years was the only one, if you can believe it, right here in Boise. And we wrote the cleaning procedures for that. We still clean that building today. It's called the Banner Bank building. And that building was quite remarkable because of the achievements that they were able to obtain in recycling methodologies, cleaning methodologies, conservation methodologies, especially with electricity and heat. And we're part of that, and we're part of it yet today. Several years back, I went into business with my son Russ, back into the building maintenance industry after we sold ProTeam, our manufacturing company. And we continue today cleaning buildings in Boise. We also own the Maid Brigade, which is a maid service, obviously, and it's a national franchise. In 2006, my son Russ was on the marketing team for Maid Brigade, a franchisor company, national. The national board that he sat on was designing new ideas and new marketing concepts to help franchisees like ourselves become successful in whatever town they were in. And we, or I should say my son, recommended to the owners of the Maid Brigade that they needed to take their company green. And they had no idea what we were talking about. Long story short, Russ and I ended up writing the SOP for green cleaning methodologies, all the standard operating procedures. We designed and recommended all of the equipment, all the tools, all of the chemistries that were going to be used. And that program, as written, was adopted by Maid Brigade National and is used today in the United States. So we're pretty proud of that, obviously. And I know that Maid Brigade gets a lot of mileage out of being a truly certified green cleaning company across the United States. The only maid service, by the way, that is in this country actually being certified. They use Unger microfiber towels, mop heads for cleaning cloth. They use protein products, which is the vacuum that we help design and manufacture. They use Betco chemistries, which are all certified green, and a certain cleaning protocol that's consistent with minimizing particulate discharge into the workplace, which is huge for somebody that has asthma or has a lung function problem. And many of our clients who use our company do it for that purpose, and we're very proud of that. So we continue doing that today, and I continue to work with my son. At some point, when I decide to retire, you know, he'll buy me out of the company, and he'll continue to run it like he is today. So along the way, you know, we had a couple of grandkids, and kids got married, and kids went to school, and they're all doing well. I got kids out here in the West. I got kids in the St. Louis area. I have a daughter in Colorado there, in Denver, as you know, Wayne, and they're all doing very well. And you know, I still get to run jet boats, and I still get to ride horses and run rivers and catch a few fish along the way. So I don't know how much detail you want, but I can tell stories for days.
That's awesome. And we'll talk a little more. I ask you some more questions about some of the river side of things, and I think Deb's even showing a few pictures right now of that. But stay on the kids for a second. Where's Tony these days? Because you said something there that actually surprised me. Has he gone back to the St. Louis area, or is he out in Portland area still? Where's home for Tony?
He's in St. Louis right now. He is working with a very large, internationally known marketing company. As you also know, he volunteers quite a bit at his church. But he is a writer. He's written a book with Tony Hale. It's called The Next Best Thing. It's already been published. It's doing quite well. And he's currently, at this moment, on an airplane being interviewed for a new position with Amazon. So he's on his way to Seattle for perhaps another opportunity that he will very likely take advantage of if in fact it comes together the way he thinks it's like. So he's, you know, talk to me in a month. We'll find out where he's going to be. He has two children, Sage and Finley. Sage is 12, Finley is 9. They're of course, I'm a grandfather, so they're the best grandkids in the world, right? And then both those kids are doing really, really well. They're active. My son has them in rock climbing courses, so they're learning how to be rock climbers at a very young age, which you can respect. That's the way to do it if you want them to be able to do it as they grow older as young adults. Of course, Tony still is a whitewater enthusiast and a snow skier, so he gets out west whenever he can. My son Russ has a family living here in Eagle, Idaho. I have 2 grandchildren there. My oldest grandson, his name is Austin. He became a cougar, Wayne. He's up at Pullman.
Oh,
and,
wow.
Yeah, he got a real wonderful. He got a great scholarship. He is in astrophysics. I don't think I could spell it, but that's his choice of study. And so he's up there learning how to get along with a new found freedom and a new life, and he's having a blast and doing really well in school, actually. And then, of course, our granddaughter, Mackenzie, she's going to Eagle High, and she's the cheerleader type. So, you know, I got my eye on her, and I'm pretty protective. But yeah, the kids are all doing well, and still pretty active in everything. So.
Awesome. Well, let me just focus on a couple of other things here and allow you to talk about a whole bunch of things. So, you know, when you were growing up, let's say you were 15 years old and you were there in Boise and it was a Saturday afternoon, it was just flat out beautiful, and you didn't have any requirements. You could be doing whatever you wanted. What would Russ be doing on a Saturday afternoon when he was 15?
Oh, I'd probably be swimming in the canal, the Riding Ball Canal, and You know, I lived in the North End, and we were 3 blocks from Camel's Back, and you know, the canals were not covered in those days, so we were either up on the hill trying to kill ourselves on our bicycles by taking them down the backside, or we were up there with our 22 rifles chasing rabbits around, or we were in the canal swimming, trying to catch crawdads on a typical sunny day in the summer. And that's what I'd be doing. I guarantee it. You know, so that's how I grew up in the North End.
Yeah. Can you remember an event from that time in your life, or even, let's say, all the way even through high school, which really just a single event that caused you to pursue any of your current life path, whether it be your business path, which has had this, you know, at least thread all the way through it that has included, I will call it stewardship, your desire to help people maintain things they have, in this case buildings and property and so on, in a good and better way. Or I know that you talked a little bit about it, but you also are a huge steward of the earth from the perspective of land and fish and wildlife and others. So probably either of those directions. Can you remember some event that occurred that really has?
Well, thank you. I really like to talk about those kinds of things because yes, it would be hard to say there was one event, but about the time I was in high school, I was in love with backpacking, and I also loved to hunt, particularly elk and deer. And we also, during that period of our life, and during that time, you could hunt wild sheep in Idaho. And one of the greatest trips I ever took as a young man, or as a young boy, I was either 16 or 17, I don't remember the exact age. My buddy and I, Dave Colwell, we drove from Boise up to a place called Stibnite. And from Stibnite, we went into the headwaters of Monumental Creek. Now, you know where that's at. That's at the edge of the primitive area, which all drains into the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. And what I just said there, most people have no clue about, but in those days, to drive a pickup from Boise to that location on those roads was a 12 or 13-hour trip with 90% of it on a dirt road. Okay, so that's where we were, and we decided to hike in to a place called Shell Rock Mountain, which is one of the major and more prominent peaks on the Middle Fork up near the Flying Bee Ranch. And we hiked into Shell Rock Mountain to hunt sheep. Now that sounds like maybe an afternoon jaunt, but that was 32 miles one way. Wow. And we keep in mind there was no Gore-Tex in those days. We had no fleece. We barely had sleeping bags. Of course, there were mummy bags, and they would get wet because they were downfilled. There were no maps. It was all flat maps. There was no topo maps. There was no. We didn't even. I mean, you can't even believe this. It's like drawing a line on a flat piece of paper, and you go from point A to point B, and somehow we would find it and get there. And we hunted sheep in there, and we saw 40 or 50 wild sheep. We did not see any good rams. We did not harvest the sheep, but we had a lot of harrowing experiences. I remember getting hypothermia. I didn't know what it was at the time, but I can assure you I was hypothermic as I look at it years later. And that was due to the fact that we'd hike in the rain all day and up into the snow level. Keep in mind, this is in September, so we're high. And I remember sitting on the trail one time crying, and I have no idea why I'm crying. And later I discovered, you know, I had hypothermia, and it's just because I had been wet for so long. And the thing that really brought us around is when the sun came out that afternoon, as I'm sitting there trying to figure out where to go, we ended up shooting a young deer. And the process of harvesting that deer and cooking it brought me around, and that was, I'll never forget how thankful I was for the opportunity to make it, because it was a very rigorous trip. We were young guys. We didn't have the right equipment, but we were long on guts, and we were in great shape, and we learned how to live off the land. And that was the first of many trips that I took into the Middle Fork of the Salmon River. And I can assure you, I've hiked the Middle Fork of the Salmon River, top to bottom, more than once. I've done Big Creek more than once. I've done the Big Horn Crags, the Seven Devils, all the sawtooths during that period of time. And we did it with little or no money, and certainly very little equipment. And we didn't have the tools that you might have today. From that, I gained a huge, huge appreciation and love for the outdoors, and have a real soft spot in my heart for the Adjumous fish that migrate to Idaho and spawn in all of these areas that I just mentioned, like Big Creek and the Middle Fork of the Salmon River and all the little tributaries. I mean, can you imagine, Wayne, being in some high meadow at the base of some major drainage, or at the beginning of some major drainage, and you go up there and you come around a corner, and in the beaver pond is a salmon spawning or trying to get over the beaver dam? I mean, can you imagine that? And seeing that kind of stuff, 1,000 miles from the ocean, and after you see things like that, you have a real appreciation for the wildlife, especially in Idaho. And of course, we would run into cougar and bear and wolves and coyote and sheep and goats. Oh my gosh, we had encounters that you can't even believe. And so every year, instead of playing football or doing those kinds of things like normal kids, I would spend it in the mountains of Idaho, chasing some critter around, or trying to catch a trout, and or trying to hike down a new trail that I'd never been on and see a new mountain or perhaps another lake. And I could write book after book after book. I could take any one of these trips and fill 100 pages just with the thoughts and the discussions that we had around the fires at night and in the different places that we were at. And I do that yet today, but I've used my legs up, so I got to ride horses now. So even yet today, my wife and I, we go back into these areas that I've talked about a little bit, and we've gone in and horseback trips, and we still camp out. We still sleep on the ground. I believe in that. But the fact is, the last trip we took,
I don't have a hard time.
I remember the last trip I took with the last trip I took with my wife, we went to a place called Valhalla, which is off the East Fork of the Salmon River, 9 miles one way, and that was the last trip she helped me pack elk camp in this year. So we still do it. We go to these places that I went to, gosh, 30, 40 years ago, Wayne, 45 years ago. It's amazing.
Yeah.
50 years ago.
Take any one of those real quickly. Even the place you just described, Valhalla, just so that people understand it. The technology's changed, you've changed, but I'm guessing a lot of those areas aren't a whole lot different than they were 45, 50 years ago. That's how remote some parts of Idaho are, right?
Oh, absolutely. You take this place I just mentioned on the East Fork of the Salmon River. One of the major the East Fork of the Salmon River comes into the main Salmon River down below Stanley. Some of your viewers may know where Stanley, Idaho is, because it's quite a popular vacation spot. Downstream from there flows the main salmon. And approximately 40 miles downstream from Stanley, you have the East Fork come in. So now at that point, the Salmon River is going, at that point it's going northwest, or northeast, excuse me. And when you go up the Little Salmon River, or the East Fork of the Salmon River, that road goes about 25 miles up there, and at the end of the road you take a turn onto Herd Creek, and Herd Creek is another tributary of the East Fork, and then you go to the trailhead. And from there on, there are no people. I mean, when we get on horseback, after we get out of the trailhead, you wander off into a huge area that actually circles around behind Sun Valley up into the Goat Mountain area. And this trail is quite hazardous. It's very narrow. There are no four-wheelers. There's no motorcycles allowed. You're not going to see anybody hiking those trails. Anybody up there is going to probably be on horseback. And we go up that trail about 9 miles to our camp, and it's called Valhalla. And Valhalla is at the headwater of a very small stream called Taylor Creek. It's at 7,900 feet, and that's where we camp and have for years. And Wayne, I will tell you, this year, when we were up there, the only persons I ever saw was, now this is during elk season. Of course, we're archers. We all hunt with a bow. But the only people I saw was at the trailhead. Never saw anybody on the mountain, and I was up there for 10 days. And that's just one of 1,000 spots I could take you to.
And I don't think most people, even here in Colorado, where we are outdoors folks, realize the remoteness of some of that area and how, like I said, it hasn't changed a lot in 50 years. I'm going to keep moving on some of these questions. I could listen to you tell these stories forever, and I'm sure our listeners can too, but they also like some of these questions that we ask, and so let me just continue here. Is there one person during your youth that you can remember that had a really major influence on you that you can still just point to today? So again, somebody you don't have to think a lot about, you can just quickly come to your head that affected you as a youth that still.
Absolutely. His name is Dave Colwell. I mentioned him first when he and I first decided to be sheep hunters in Idaho, and took off and drove our pickup truck at the end of the road above Stibnite and ended up on Monumental Creek. At that time, he was the only person that I knew that would ever do something like that. You got to remember, we're 17 or 16 years old, Wayne. We don't have parents with us. We don't have a topo map. I don't even have a compass. And we are following our nose down the drainage, assuming that we are on the right trail. And from time to time, in those days, they actually kept the trails in pretty good shape. You would see a sign, it would verify where you were. And we would get on top of some ridge and look down into the deep country and say, okay, I think we're going to be over there this time tomorrow. And the next day, we'd be over there looking back, thinking, gosh, we got to hike back that way. So Dave Colwell was the only guy I knew at the time that would do that. He's a tremendous outdoorsman. In fact, let me show you something. This is a picture of Dave. I don't know if you can see it. If you can see it here, you'll notice that he is behind a Marco Polo ram that he just got in Pakistan this year. That's this guy. I just saw him. He is a world-class, renowned hunter. That's a Marco Polo ram. Not very many guys know what a Marco Polo ram is. So he's the guy that I used to go with, and he still does it today. He's a veterinarian of medicine. He lives in Kodiak Island.
Wow.
So he would probably
when you do some of your Alaska fishing, is he somebody you go up and see there, Russ? I don't know that I've ever asked you that. You've told me about Dave before, but I didn't know whether you still were able to connect with him in adventures today.
Oh, yeah. So we've gone on several trips with Dave. Most of my trips are with other fellows that Dave is more of a big game hunter than he is a fisherman. So when I do an expedition in Alaska, we'll pick a river. We'll hire a bush pilot. We'll fly us into the river, say like the Kinnickinnic River. It comes out of Kinnickinnic Lake, which is in western part of Alaska, flows into the Bering Sea. And so it's 107 miles from the ocean. They'll land us in the lake. We'll rent a raft. We'll jump on the raft, and we'll float to the ocean, and then they'll pick us up 8 or 9 days later. And And we'll pick new rivers every time we go. And I've floated probably a dozen or so different rivers in Alaska, doing the same thing, just picking river, talking to a fishing game officer up there, asking them what time the runs are there, when I should be there. We're all fly fishermen, and then we'll just take off and we'll just go and we'll just float out. And the number of things.
How far, Russ? I hate to interrupt, but I want to. How far are you away from the world record now of a king salmon? I used to know this number 10 years ago. I haven't asked you in a long time. You are a very small number away from a world record king salmon on a fly rod. How far today?
Well, I can't answer that question. At the time that I thought I had it, Lefty Cray had the record, and he had certified that he'd caught a 54-pound king salmon on a fly rod. And I don't know if any of your viewers know Lefty Cray, but he's not alive any longer. But he was one of the world's foremost fly fishermen, and of course he had that record certified. I caught a fish that I thought was that size. I did not have it certified. I did not even kill the fish. I caught the fish, measured its length, its girth, did the math, and figured that if I didn't break it, I was right there. I have a picture of that fish someplace, but I have since lost it. I don't even know where it's at. But to say that I have close to the world record, I can't really say that because I didn't verify it. But I know what happened, and I know I caught the fish, and I've caught hundreds of them, and this was a big fish. That was in 1978. 1978.
Okay. I got to tell a little Russ story that relates to several of these things, and then while I'm telling it, get ready for the next question, Russ, which is, what does the term sustainability mean to you? So just think about that while I tell this little story and then answer it. Russ and I went up to Alaska to go salmon fishing in the way that he just described. We were not in a new region for him. As a matter of fact, we were on a fairly well-fished area, the Kenai River, and and we had some good luck. Actually, I had some good luck, and I caught a king not on a fly, actually on a lure that Russ was very instrumental in helping me get. And then we went from there and we fished for halibut. After that, down at, why am I forgetting the name of the place that the guy from Motel 6 lives? Homer. Yeah, out of Homer.
Yeah.
Anyway, remember Russ talking earlier about the fact that these hikes that he did with Dave without anything more than a map that was on flat surface and such. I happen to know that Russ is not the best judge of directions of any human being on the planet, and I have a personal experience, several personal experiences with this. So Dave must have also been a pretty good guy in finding places. So here's my little story with Russ in Alaska. We're driving back from from Homer, Alaska to Anchorage, and it's about a 6-hour drive. I think I drove the first couple of hours, and I started to get tired. And this was during the night. Our flight from Anchorage was going to be something like 6 in the morning. So rather than give up the time, we just decided instead of sleep we'd drive. So I drove the first couple hours. I got tired. Russ started to drive, and the next thing I remember is waking up in Anchorage, Alaska, and we're almost to the airport, and Russ is totally lost in Anchorage. Okay, and we're at a gas station. And I hope your body language will tell me that you remember this. And do you recall what happened next? Don't say anything. Do you remember this? Do you remember the story? You remember what happened next?
I remember it pretty well.
I'm going to continue to tell it.
Politically correct.
Well, okay. Well, I'm going to tell it the way I remember it, and then you correct it or change it. Anyway, remember, I just woke up. I literally awoke from my sleep as we're sitting in the parking lot of a gas station that had a little kiosk stand where there was an attendant, and we were lost. Russ asks this guy who is working there, and I'm just barely waking up kind of where we were. And for some reason, the guy thought he was telling him that Russ thought we were still in Homer. And I'll never forget it. And I have given this the same way many times. This kid who had to be in his, late teens goes, "You lost!" He just yelled it out. And it was like, for some reason, he thought Russ was thinking we were still in Homer. And instead, he was just asking where the airport was from wherever we were at this gas station. And I'll never forget that, because it shocked me into being awake. And then Russ and I had to figure out where we were from the airport. But this poor guy thought that Russ had asked him how to get to the airport from Homer. And his comment was, "You lost!"
Well,
is that somewhat like you remember it?
I choose to forget certain things in life, But I will tell you one thing I do remember about that event, and it happened not too long after
I know where you're going.
Man, we had to check the car in, and we had some dead salmon in the trunk, if you recall.
Yes,
and they became a little odoriferous, as I recall. And in fact, they stuck up the whole car. I don't know if anybody's ever caught salmon that's listening, but they have quite an oil on their skin, and that gets on everything, and it's very, it's quite pungent, especially when it gets warm. And we tried to check that car in. It's unclear to me. Did we end up buying that car? I'm not sure what happened there, but I knew we were in trouble. We had to pay some extra money to have it cleaned. And I think that was directly your fault. Couldn't have been my fault.
It was.
But I'll tell you what.
Yeah. No, that's entirely accurate.
Well,
we tried to check the car in without telling them. And we actually did get it done.
Oh,
but they
man,
came
that was
up with
horrible.
it. You might be right about the fact that what we paid was a little bit more than what we thought was probably fair.
Yeah, they had to decontaminate the car. I mean, that was, well, I'll tell you what, that's the part that stuck out in my mind, is when I opened that trunk, I thought, I knew right then and there we might be in trouble. But anyway.
Well, hey, back to my question.
Yes.
What's the word sustainability
Yeah, well, those are great memories, and sometime maybe we can go into more specific detail. Before I get into the sustainability question, a couple pictures back, I don't know who was ever putting the pictures up here on the screen, but there was a lake there in a setting, in a mountain setting. That looked like Ship Island Lake to me. That's actually the Bighorn Crags. And I've hiked to that lake, I believe. If that's Ship Island Lake, it was so small I couldn't see it. But anyway, anything that's sustainable is something that the best example that I can take would be to give you something sustainable, and that is the salmon species, the anadromous fish. Idaho has some of the greatest spawning beds in the world still today. And they will sustain without any reclamation, without any improvement, or any management from us, the salmon species in Idaho. They are so productive because of the high quality of water and because of the type of soil and grit that's on the bottom of the stream to enhance the propagation of the fry and the hatching of the eggs. That's a sustainable environment for salmon because it can sustain the species. The salmon's in trouble because of other problems in Idaho, like getting from where they are hatched and where they live for a couple of years down to the ocean. That's where the problem comes in. But something that's sustainable, in this case, the habitat for salmon, is something that you don't have to interfere with. It'll keep giving on its own, and it's not going to be degraded. It's not degraded by our interference. So anything that you can have in your life that is sustainable on its own without you trying to add something to it is, of course, a gift. And we know where those kinds of gifts come from. And,
What a great story. That's a great definition. So we've had, over the last 30 of these sessions that we've done, we've had a lot of different people giving their feelings, and it's so cool how they're all different. And I react to yours so well because obviously we've shared a lot of those kinds of experiences, and I understand the same things. That's great. I'm going to rush here a little bit because we're getting a little tight on time. We try to be pretty respectful of staying at about an hour here. We started it a little bit late, but I got about 4 more questions I want to ask you. So here's one that I ask all the time. If there's in the green movement a person that you feel like has impacted you and had some impact on your life, who would that be? And can you tell us a little bit about them?
Oh, well, Wayne, that's easy. There's 2 people that I always think about when I think about the green issues and the questions and the challenges. And of course, the first would be you. You know as well as I do that upon meeting you, I learned the technical side of these issues from a position that I would never probably have taken time to research. And you were a great teacher of those values and of those standards that had to be practiced in order to have something that is healthy for you at all levels, not only in the fact of its use, but in the manufacturing of that product, whatever it might be. So you were one of those people in my life, Wayne, and you know that. The other person would be Walt Minnick. He was a past congressman in the state of Idaho, and he's one of my river running buddies, and he's one of these guys I go on these expeditions with, and we are always talking about the green problem in this country, not only with its definition, but how do you sustain that in this kind of economy? How do you get people to take the time to understand in a society that is a user society and a throwaway society? How do you get people to stop and appreciate something of value, not only in the products but in themselves? And so I would have to say you and Walt Minnick are probably the 2 most important people in my life that gave me perspective on the value of these things from a scientific position, not necessarily just an experienced position, but a scientific position. So that'd be the best way I could answer that question.
Well, first, thank you for mentioning me, but I also know Walt, and I know that you're exactly right about him, and I know he was important in your life. So here's another one. This one's a little in the other direction. Give us one memorable experience that you've had, a life experience that you've had that was negative, that you can now look back on and say, you know what, it was negative at the time, but it has now, I can see that it really has been a positive influence on my life. So something negative that now, as you look back, has turned out to become very positive for you.
No, that's a hard one, Wayne. You got me kind of flat-footed. I think the main thing for me was the sale of one of my companies. It was Western Building Maintenance, and my partner and I decided to sell Western Building Maintenance, and that company was an absolute gold mine, and it was a very, very successful company and had a great team. And I sold that company, and that was a real negative for me. But looking back now, and I was looking at it at that time, short time after selling it, gosh, that was a financial stupid decision. But looking back on it today, because I was able to sell the company and move on to other things, I did things I would have never done. I would have never met you, Wayne, probably. I would have never ventured off to Colorado. I would never have probably been involved with my son today in business or any of those things. So, one thing led to another.
Yeah. Here's another really fun one. You're not a 20-year-old, okay? So you know that old saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So you and I are kind of both a little bit of old dogs. But tell us something that you've experienced recently in your life? So I don't know, in the last 5 years, either a technology, something you're doing differently in business, even in your fishing life or your personal life, that you would say is really impacting you today. Some recent thing that has changed the way you're doing things because it happened.
Well, just, hey, this right now. Wayne, come on. You know, I said earlier in your interview, a computer's been a typewriter to me ever since I got one, and I own several. And so, you know, I am the worst person in the world to have a computer because I don't use but 1/10 of 1% of it, and have never really been interested in using it. I'm still an analog guy. I still have a daily planner, a Franklin planner that I carry around like a Bible.
But you and I both started using it at the same time, by the way, in 1988.
Yep. So I have resisted the technology we're using right now. I just haven't done it. And so one of the things that I'm going to change, one of the things that I'm going to get done in 2015 is to be more apt in these kinds of technologies and especially in the media, to be able to communicate with people and to do business and share ideas. And so that's kind of a new challenge for me. But I guess that would be the best way I could answer that question.
That's a great one. That's a great one. What's a book that you've read recently that, because I know you like to read, that's influencing you today?
Well, I just started a long journey to freedom about Nelson Mandela. I just started that one, so I can't really tell you too much about the book yet. I'm anxious to get into it. Probably the one that I.
And what's another one? You were starting to say there was another one.
Well, the other one that I finished recently, it was probably one of the best books I've ever read. Was a Sorrow in My Heart, and that's a book about Tecumseh, the famous Indian warrior in the late 1700s in the United States. Probably one of the most exciting men that I've ever read about, by far. So it's called A Sorrow in My Heart. I don't remember the author's name, but that would certainly rank as one of the better books I've ever read. A Sorrow in My Heart.
And about Tecumseh. Okay, got it.
Tecumseh, yeah.
So two more questions that are really the ones you and I had talked about on a list, and then I got one I'm just going to throw out of nowhere. I'm going to do this one right now. I happen to know that it's been a while ago now, but it was a pretty dramatic shift, and I'd like you to talk about it. You had something happen in your life spiritually that happened while we've known each other. Tell everybody a little bit about that and what it's done for you differently.
Well, I've had several things happen in that category, Wayne, and it's really hard to talk about it with people that I don't even know who's watching. But I had a real experience with Jesus Christ in about the year 2000, and when I came back to Jesus and started doing the walk in my Christian faith, many things changed. I've had a number of things that prodded me along the way to make some changes, but it was after I came back from Colorado that I knew that I needed to find I needed to find Russ, and I needed to find my spirit, and I found it through Jesus Christ. And the things that happened, I don't think I have enough time to talk about. There was many things that happened.
We'll talk about that later, but I just wanted you to at least be able to throw that in. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I have two more questions, and then we're going to wrap it up. And I'm looking on our screen if people have questions, and certainly we always have a lot more people that watch this as a replay. So Russ, if you don't mind, if I get some questions later on the replay, I'll probably just ask those to you privately, and you can give us some answers. But just a few more questions. One of them, a little bit like the book. Is there a quote or a phrase, because I know you've got some of these, and I'm real curious what you're going to say, from someone famous that you can remember that you think that our audience should hear. So a quote from a person that a lot of people would consider famous, or that you do, that you remember that you think our audience should hear, that would be good for them.
Wow. There's so many, Wayne. Gosh, I wish I'd have thought about that a little bit more. The one that I say quite often myself is from probably the most famous person in my life, and Jesus Christ said it. He said, "Peace be with you." And so when I'm talking to somebody about something very serious, maybe it's a life challenge, maybe it's a business challenge, I usually end with my salutation being, "Peace be with you." And I can't think of one that would be probably more pertinent than that this time of year, and probably used more by me at least than that particular quote.
You know, that's awesome, and I'm going to use that. Yeah, and I'm gonna actually use that to end on, rather than asking you the last question, because that is so impactful for me and probably a lot of our people listening. So, Russ, this has been awesome. You know, we don't connect as much as we'd like, and we enjoy connecting whenever we do. And I told you before, we'll talk offline here a little bit about a bunch of things. But thank you so much. We appreciate it. And do you have anything else you'd like to add before we sign off? And I just think that was a wonderful way to end. That's why I thought, instead of even asking you the last question that I had. And then if we could, everybody know that there'll be a replay of this. You can watch that. Please know that we'll do this again next week. Actually, it'll be back-to-back weeks, and then we'll do another one in the next year. You know, we'll start in January on the first Monday or first Wednesday. And so we thank you for coming. Please look us up on the internet and on Facebook at Nurse the Planet and at Economics, and interact with us, engage with us. You know, tell us what you'd like to hear. Give us some speakers you'd like for us to engage with. And Russ, we thank you, but you know, I'll let you put the last word here. Just kind of end us with anything you'd like to say, taking us out the door.
Okay. Well, thank you, Wayne. It's a little poem. I've kissed and closed with the naked north, and I've learned to defy and defend. And shoulder to shoulder, I've fought it out. Aye, but the wild, she must win in the end. See you later, pal.